Hey everyone, this is Lucid. I'm going to be doing the Pretender design right now for Lemuria in the upcoming Let's Play. I'm re-recording this. I'd actually recorded this a while ago before I started the game. But anyway, I've learned a lot, I think, by playing. I'm about halfway through the game at this point. I don't have any idea who's going to win, but... and I've also played against Lemuria in a couple of my other multiplayer games, and I have a few more thoughts on Pretender design, so rather than do an end-of-episode update where I kind of talk about it at the end, I'm going to go ahead and do a better Pretender creation right now. Anyway, so for Lemuria, if you think about them as a nation, they are very strong in the very early game because ghosts are awesome against all sorts of indies. Indies that a lot of other nations struggle with, ghosts are good at. Are good against, like barbarians they're fine against, heavy cav they're fine against. There's very little that enough ghosts cannot conquer. However, in the mid-game, early mid-game especially, they tend to fall off because they get just destroyed by some basic research with Astral mages or priests, or especially communion priests with banishment. So they fall off, they have this, without using the Pretender, they fall off really hard in the mid-game. And they tend to be pretty good in the late mid-game when they get some key research objectives online. And then they will be pretty good again in the late game, and very good in the very late game when they can get up things like Underdark and Burden of Time and stuff. But I think the main thing to think about with your Pretender is what are you going to do at the end of year one when you're getting rushed or otherwise are very vulnerable to other people coming and attacking you. So I think you have basically three choices. You can do... you don't need an Awake Expander because you can expand really, really fast, way faster than maybe even you should without an Awake Expander. You do so well against indies. You can put up an expansion party every other turn, if not every turn sometimes. And you can get really big really quick. In the mid-game, though, you're going to really struggle. So you can basically do a super combatant or a bless that you're going to use for your consuls, who are your 25 Death Gem Holy 3 guys that have armor and ethereal and fear. They're great thug chassis, and they're very, very good at raiding. So you can design a Pretender around that. You can also have a Pretender which is more focused on your mages, and it will do things that allow them to cast their spells a little better. And that can really come in two flavors. You can have one flavor where you're using your Pretender in early game wars as a kind of super mage. So if you do that, you're probably going to want to have... You're going to want to know what spells you're going to research. A lot of times, the good spells to research are usually in Evocation. There's a lot of good stuff for you. In Alteration, there's a lot of good stuff. And in Enchantment, there's really good stuff. In Enchantment, there's Rigor Mortis and Grip of Winter. In Evocation, there is Cloud of Death and Winds of Death, and some other stuff too, like Shadow Blast at 5. And then in Alteration... you get Soul Vortex, which makes your Grand Lemurs very, very good in combat, as well as Invulnerability and Darkness that will make your guys very good. So those are the things you're typically going to want to research. So if you get paths on a Pretender in the mid-game when they spawn that will be really useful in large battles, then you can take advantage... Or basically, you can win some battles where otherwise you're not going to be able to. Because really, in the mid-game with Lemuria, you're not going to be able to take battles, like large like Death Ball type battles, against most other players. So, unless you're bringing something special. So, I'll talk real quick about the Thug Bless you can go for. With Thugs, like I said, it's going to be going on your console. And the consuls are already pretty good at killing indie provinces. They kind of don't really need a bless to kill indie provinces. One thug, one consul probably can. Now, they definitely do benefit from a bless, and if you give them a good bless, they can kill small player armies. And then with a good bless and gear, they can actually kill kind of large player armies. So they're not vulnerable like your Grand Lemurs to things like Mind Hunt, but yeah. Anyway, let's go talk about it. So fire has a lot of good things for you. Fire resistance is pretty good, especially if you think you might be fighting Abyssia. Fire shield is also pretty good. If you're in a game with Abyssia, you want to skip it though, because not only does Abyssia have fire resistance, but everybody's probably going to be getting, or Marignon too sometimes, people will start getting fire resistance on their bless if they're fighting Abyssia, in which case they would likely be resistant to this. But this is a pretty good option. I don't know how this interacts with awe. I haven't tested it. I'm not sure if fire shield applies if an awe check goes off or not. So the better option here is actually probably awe. And you're not going to get both, actually, so it's kind of a moot point. I don't even know why I said that. But awe is probably the better pickup. It's one more expensive. And really what you're doing with awe is you're going to combine it probably with like reforming flesh. But you don't even necessarily need that. And you're going to basically wait until your fear aura wears whoever's attacking you down, and then they eventually rout. Fire shield is different. You're actually going to kill a lot of the stuff attacking you, and so in that case, this will be better when you combine your thugs and armies. But this will be better if you're just using them to raid. So anyway, those are options. Yeah, I think those are good things. Shock resistance can be really good if you're fighting good air nations. Things like Wrathful Skies can really hurt. Not only will it eventually kill your mages, which are usually trying to drag out battles and have very long battles, and they want to keep the battlefield-wide spells they have up. So eventually they will get killed by Thunderstrike and Wrathful Skies. So if you have shock resistance, your mages will be immune to that, and it will be a pretty big buff. It will also make your thugs pretty hard to kill by small player armies if they are using air mages. So anyway, that's something to consider. Everything else you kind of want to skip. For cold, you already have cold resistance, so you don't want any of that stuff. Defense is okay, but not great. I will say defense is better if you have Ethereal, because when you're fighting normal attacks, first they have to go through Ethereal, and only then do they make a defense check. And so what that means is you're going to get surrounded much less frequently, which will mean your defense gets eroded much less frequently, which means higher defense. You will have higher defense for longer. So anyway, just know that if you have Ethereal units, which you do, your defense skill is more valuable. Frost weapons, skip it. Chill Aura, you could do this. Often, though, you'll be fighting an enemy dominion, which may or may not be cold. And if it is cold, then they're probably immune to cold themselves. It would make your guys slightly better in friendly dominion, but I wouldn't really go for it unless you needed water and didn't know what else to get. Quickness you could get. Quickness is always nice on undead units because they don't get the fatigue penalty and they don't really care about the aging issues. But aside from that, your consuls don't really have great weapons by default. They just have a little short sword, so they're not really amazing damage machines. They're really, when they raid, they're really relying on their fear aura, and quickness doesn't necessarily help with fear. So yeah, you can kind of skip it. Quickness is much better on like Airmore, where you have lots of sacred units that are going to be using their weapons to kill stuff. Mountain survival, all the survival stuff is situationally useful. So if you have a spare point, look at getting it. Mountain survival's fine. Reinvigoration's okay. You don't really need it on your consuls, but it does help on your Grand Lemurs. Reconstruction you don't need. Strength of the Earth you don't really need. Unbreakable you don't need. Fire and shock resistance, like we said, is nice. These two deserve special mention. Hard Skin, this is pretty good. It increases your natural protection. So it's going to stack diminishingly with your real armor. So you're only going to get like 2 to 3 additional armor from this. So not a huge win. This is probably the better pickup, though it's one more point. And yeah, it will make you survive alpha strikes much better, and then it will also make you much more resistant to a lot of the anti-thug units, which may get sent at you with maybe high damage weapons or something like that. So this is something you could look at. For Astral, you've got magic resistance stuff, which is always good. The magic weapons you can skip. Solar weapons you can skip. These two deserve special mention. They're very good for your casters. Farcaster's really good. It's going to work with your consuls on their holy spells, so they can do apostasy farther, so they can potentially snipe holy units that are all the way in the back row. So this is particularly cool. Definitely something you should think about picking up. And then Arcane Finesse is also something you can pick up. It's got +1 magic penetration, which will also work with apostasy. But this will also work with Winds of Death, which is really a key spell for this nation, I think. It's one of the battlefield wipe spells that you can use, and very few nations are resistant to it. So anyway, something good to pick up. And almost all of the death spells have an MR check in it somewhere. So this will not only be good with Winds of Death or just with your apostasy, it will be good with almost all of the death spells, which are like evocation-oriented. Farcaster's also good with evocation-oriented spells like Clouds of Death in particular. You can cast it significantly farther, so you can get basically way more value out of every cast, potentially even getting it all the way into the back enemy mage line. So those are both definitely worth picking up. You could even go so far as to pick up both of them if you wanted to go for Astral 8, which is expensive, but it's totally viable, and you'll have the design points to do it if you want to. Death, there's a few things that deserve special mention. One is Undead Command. This is particularly nice. You get a lot of free spawn priests. You get enough free spawn priests to lead your dudes around, so you do not need this. But if you have it, you can lead more dudes around with it. And what that will mean is you'll effectively have more of your priests reanimating stuff rather than moving troops around. So definitely worth considering. It's not super value, but if you don't have anything else you want to spend it on, you can do it. Skip these. Stygian Flesh you can skip to. It's going to have the same vulnerability that Ethereal does, so you don't really need it. Reanimators, this deserves particular mention. It's probably too expensive in general. They probably need to cut the cost by like 1 or 2. But it is cool. It says about 50% of the time you'll reanimate things. I feel it's significantly less than that, maybe like 30%. I don't know. But it doesn't feel like it's 50. A lot of nations it's not good on because your priests, like, let's take Ulm, you cast Iron Blizzard, and you've got all these darts raining down. You kill a bunch of the units, some of them rise as dead, but then they get hit by all the evocations which were already targeted there. So, for mages, often this is kind of counterproductive because you end up killing a lot of the stuff you summon. But death magic usually does not target undead. So, even like if you do Clouds of Death, things that get killed will potentially get reanimated. Or like Shadow Blast, things will get reanimated. And then other Shadow Blasts which come down will not affect the things that get reanimated, and so this can help kind of beef up your front line. I've actually used it. I don't think it's a great pick. I would probably get the equally expensive Reforming Flesh in the future, but it's not bad. I wouldn't say it's bad. It's definitely something to consider. If you go with a mage-focused build, like let's say you got... This would be pretty expensive, but if you got Reanimator, Arcane Finesse, and Farcaster, you would have some pretty potent mages. Spamming Clouds of Death, that would be pretty good. For nature, there's a lot of good things that come from nature. If you have nature and water on your pretender, you can do Foul Vapors, which you normally wouldn't have access to. Anyway, I have nature on my pretender in this game, and it does open up some cool stuff. I'm not going to talk about all the path stuff you get with it, but in terms of the Bless itself, you don't need poison resistance. Force survival is always cool. On aging, you don't need poison weapons. You don't need. Recuperation is actually particularly nice. In some ways, it's redundant because immortals, when they die, they get a chance to remove afflictions. But a lot of times, you don't want your mages to die, or your consuls. You want them to live, and they tend to accumulate afflictions. Sometimes some really bad ones. So this is a good way to get rid of them over time without having to figure out ways to kill them off. So I actually like this as a pickup if you can afford it and want to go nature. Berserker you could get, but you probably don't want to because you don't want your mages, your Grand Lemurs getting berserked. Barkskin actually is pretty good on this. If there's not a lot of fire in the game you're in, Barkskin can be really good. For consuls, it's going to give them effectively 5 more armor because it will get their natural protection up to 10, and then it will stack diminishingly with the armor they already have. I don't know what the natural protection of consuls is. I'm assuming it's 0, but if it's higher, then it'll be a little bit less than effectively 5 armor. But you could totally get this. And then regeneration does not work for you. And the blood stuff you could get. Blood surge is always kind of nice, but it's better just to get the 1 defense or reinvigoration probably than get blood surge. Anyway, it's an option, and I'd skip the other. I would skip blood. I think if you want to do a thug build, you want to pick up reforming flesh, and then you want to pick up one of the other defensive things. You could either get like fire and shock resistance. You could get fire and shock resistance this way by getting fire and air, depending which paths you want. You could pick up all. You could pick up fire shield. You could pick up fortitude or hard skin. So I would get probably one of those in conjunction with reforming flesh, and then you can use your consuls as thugs. You could also get bark skin. So any of those plus reforming flesh, and you get very thuggy consuls depending on who's in your game. So I'll show you a few of the builds I did, and I'll end with the pretender that I actually picked for this game. So first we'll start with this one. This is a Titan of the Underworld, which is kind of cool because he can assassinate people and he's invisible, which means you can't patrol him out. He's also pretty damn terrifying, and if you get Conjuration with him, you can assassinate and do Fire Elemental spam or Earth Elemental spam, depending on who you think you'll be assassinating. And that's freaking scary. So a lot of times, he's dormant, he'll come out year 1. A lot of times to kill Lemuria, people will try to cap rush you. And if they cap rush you and you have this guy sitting in your capital, he can assassinate a commander every turn and potentially really hurt the army that's sitting there. Not to mention you can kit him up kind of like a super combatant. Because death, earth, and fire are the best super combatant paths. They get Phoenix, Pyre later, Temper Flesh, Soul Vortex, and they're very, very, very hard to kill. And then so anyway, good stuff. This is a totally viable build. You could win a multiplayer game with this. There's tons of other ways, as I mentioned before, that you could build for tanky, thuggy consuls. But what's important about this is your consuls, you want to start production before the end of year 1, but you're not going to have a ton of consuls probably early. And while you can use them to expand, it's usually better to use things like Centurions early on to expand, as you'll see in the actual Let's Play. But as you get close to the end of year 1, you want to start getting a lot of consuls out so that you can go into phase 2 where you really kick it into gear, either attacking somebody using this bless. And if you go with this, you will not have a weak early mid-game. You'll have a very, very strong early mid-game. Which is normally a very weak time for the nation. Next, we have a Rainbow Pretender. This is dormant, so she'll come out. You really probably don't want to go imprisoned, because whatever you have come online, you're going to need it to come online at the end of year 1. That's when you start getting really vulnerable. This is going to be a mostly mage-focused build, and it's going to give you good resistances, so it's going to be very hard for enemy mages to kill your mages while they're sitting behind your troops. But this will also be pretty damn good for your consuls, especially if you put gear on your consuls. They'll be very, very hard to kill. If you're willing to sacrifice some other stuff, you can get death up to do Reforming Flesh. Here I have Undead Command, which you really want to have Reforming Flesh if you do this. You could switch out who you pick. Like you could get an immobile Demi-Lich, and you would probably have enough to do something similar to this, and also have Reforming Flesh. You want 7 Dominion. For your scales, I haven't talked about that, but you're going to be tanking the first 3. You're going to pick Cold. Death starts off as 3, so you can't really tank it by picking Death. And then Luck, you want Luck 3 and Magic 3 if you can. If you have to compromise between these, I would compromise Luck a little bit, rather than Magic. This one also has Recuperation, which is nice, but This will add some much needed magic diversity and a good research boost, which will help get you out of that mid-game slump much faster. So definitely something like this you could win a game with. It'll be a significantly different playstyle than the build I just showed you. You will be much weaker in the early mid-game, and you'll be using this guy to kind of get you through the early mid-game. By the way, you should also twice-born him if you do pick him, because it's a shitty chassis, but he can definitely bring some key spells to big battles. And also really help your research, so you get some of the key spells which will allow you to defend yourself sooner. So you should think about it. Like, you could win a game with this, but it's going to be a very different playstyle. And then next I'm going to show you the Pretender I used, which I'm not sure is optimal. I really like her, though. It's fun. And this is Octavia the Lich Queen. She is a build that is focused on two things. One is being a combat mage when she comes out. So she will be coming to all of my early game fights. She spawns into Year 1. She comes to all of my early game fights. She has Death 7, and I'm going to be researching paths that are going to give me cool death stuff. So she can do really big death stuff with Death 7, and she doesn't get fatigued out very quickly because her path is so high. She's high enough in Astral where you don't mind bringing her because she's not very likely to die in a magic duel. And if she does die, it will usually have caused a lot of damage to the enemy. Nature is really good to have on the... You can get some cool stuff with sleep, and then mass protection and mass regeneration. And you can also potentially, if you get Mother Oak up, you could potentially do living castles underwater and be just as effective underwater as you are on land. So anyway, a pretty cool... also, air is a key pickup here because air plus death allows you to do Wind of Death spam, and with Death 7, you can cast Wind of Death just non-stop several times before you have a retreat, and she can wipe out a whole army. So very cool. I really like her. I'm not sure if it's optimal, but yeah, it's fun. This is what I went with. So for the Bless, again, it's Dominion 7 and then the same paths. For the Bless, Minor Magic Resistance, and then Arcane Finesse, which is going to allow her, because she's going to be doing Wind of Death anyway, it's going to allow her to do that better. And then we have Reanimators, which is going to help with Cloud of Death spam and things like that. This, if I picked her again, I would probably switch this to the Reforming Flesh, because that alone will help your consuls so much, and you really have a much better option to use them as thugs. And then finally we have Recuperation, which I did like, and I do like. It is a little redundant with Immortality, but I like it. Anyway, super viable. This is what I picked. So, yeah. And feel free in the comments below to put in kind of what builds you have tried and like, or you want to try. But yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you're looking forward to the next episode. See ya.